Yeah, hi Bernard. Am I audible, Bernard? Yeah, hi Wim. Am I audible?
Yes, yeah.
Okay, thank you. We'll wait for some time. Can we start? Uh, uh, Hello everyone. So here's the agenda. I have added one story here. If you feel something need to be added, let's add it and then start our discussion. We'll wait for another minute and then we'll quickly start. Okay. So let's start our today's meeting. So yeah, hi everyone. So I'll just before starting our meeting, I'll just give a quick recap of our last meeting. So in our last meeting, we had started our discussion around the policy as an action mechanism, so that we were discussing, and also some activities we did around the synergy between observability group and our assurance group. And there we discussed around the development happened in the observability and what their directions. And Stephen shared his documentation around the topology controller. So that we are considering for our in reference code. So here the documentation is available, and I think recently also Stephen has pushed this documentation to the Nephew repository. So this was the quick recap. And today in agenda I have added the discussion on our first user story. So that is an impact analysis. So there I would like to discuss and see means like what are the gaps there, or whether it's a good starting point to start it. So let's quickly discuss on it. So Bernard, would you like to initiate this topic, or would like to share your screen?
Okay, I have to apologize. My audio is not so good. I hope it's okay nevertheless. Just please give me feedback if that's not the case.
It sounds fine, Bernard.
Yep.
Okay, good. So I was coming from sort of the approach of trying to define user stories which would reflect certain functions in the design considerations document. So if you would go to, yes, exactly, to page 3, at the bottom, we have sort of a list of functions which I believe at least would be needed in order to support service assurance activities. And I, with my first user story, would be very much focusing on the second bullet point. That means a function which describes which resources and services are subject to service assurance mechanisms and how they relate to one another. And I'd like to try to explain that a little bit from what I've understood from the R1 release. In the R1 release, we've got a custom resource called network function topology. And this network function topology has a list of network function instances which describe what kind of network functions should be deployed to which clusters. This is a high-level description, already sort of trying to describe the intent which, for instance, a telco DevOps team might want to issue to a Git repository, based on which then the Nevio processes would hydrate that information and ultimately sort of generate custom resources which would be deployed onto the workload clusters. The network function topology is not in release 1, you say, Wim?
Nope.
Okay, so nevertheless, I'm just coming from this network function topology idea and saying if we are deploying a network function topology, we are specifying a high-level intent in the sense of we would like to have these network functions be deployed onto the following clusters. And what we would need in addition is the understanding of how those network function instances would relate to deployments, pods, services, etc., in order to then be able to create a tree which would relate these high-level network function topology intents to the sort of basic resources running in a Kubernetes cluster, being sort of the pods, deployment services, etc. And if I would now sort of move to the next page, please. One page further, please, sorry. This is the first user story. The user story would sort of try to address the following problem statement. How can a service assurance solution determine if issues related to managed resources affect the desired state and qualities expressed in a high-level intent? That means, imagine that we've got capability to observe pods and services, etc. And we notice that one of those sort of resources is not okay. How would I know which high-level intent, and in this case, which network function topology would be affected by that? And as a user story, I've been writing as a DevOps engineer for a network solution. That means coming from a telco operator perspective, this would be a DevOps engineer here. I want to understand which Kubernetes resources relate to the high-level intent, which I have forwarded to the Kubernetes API, so that based on this information, I can add correlation rules to my service assurance solution, which would allow me to determine if issues related to a managed resource affect the intent. And here I would like to have a mechanism which describes how the information which is being generated in the context of the Nevio configuration processes allows me to determine and sort of retrieve this dependency graph in a standardized and machine-readable manner. And ideally, it should also allow for sort of filtering sort of according to the affected clusters. And I believe, Subhash, you had the first hand up. Maybe you would like to start with comments.
Yes. Yeah, thank you, Bernard, for this explanation. So yeah, in this use case, first I would like to understand in a concrete point what exactly is the high-level intent for us. Because when we say NF topology, actually I was going through the code of NF NF controller. So there I see all the relationship actually happens around the NF topology and the NF deployed. I think, yeah, NF deployed. So what exactly we should consider as our high level intent? Another one, what we should consider for our resource that comes under this high level intent, and what should exactly the relationship. So if someone is familiar with R1 and R2, what exactly we should consider it, and try to think around it. So that I would like to know if someone would comment. I hope my question is clear.
I could give sort of a partial answer, but not a complete answer to that. And I believe maybe Wim would probably also be sort of very suitable to address that. But I just wanted to mention sort of, to be honest, I'm not really saying it has to be the network function topology custom resource as an entry point. But you have to imagine that as a telco operator, there will be a DevOps team which will try to express a high-level intent, could be a network function topology or something else. And it would hand it over to the Nephew processes and have the hydration being applied to sort of this information. And ultimately, in the end, in the workload clusters, there will be typical resources such as pods and deployments and services being sort of generated or deployed onto those workload clusters. And I would like to have a kind of sort of graph which would allow me to determine how sort of this high-level intent maps to those low-level custom standard resources. Yeah, maybe Wim, you would like to jump in here.
Yeah, so I have one let's say observation is that the system we have today, right? So we kind of delegate certain responsibilities to certain entities, right? So in other words, here is my view is like, if we talk about topology, we don't have it in R1, we are working on it in R2. So let's assume we have it. Let's say you get 5 network functions, right? That you need. And we somehow say, okay, so cluster 1 has 1, cluster 2, the second, and so on, right? Still 5 as the 5th. The relationship to services and pods is not known, or is not, I think, potentially relevant in the management cluster, because we want to delegate it. So what happens is the controller that takes the NF deployment, he will basically figure out the decomposition of how to, with an instruction, I need this network function with a set of attributes. He is going to disseminate it into the next level of detail until a network function is deployed, right? And I believe that the hierarchy we should maintain. So what I'm trying to say is that there's no point in trying to make the upper level understand all the nitty-gritty details, because we end up in having to expose everything everywhere. So I'm of the opinion that the aggregation effect that you have to expand those details should remain at the entity on which that happened. And he or she, maybe we should talk about she, because we need more women in our teams. They should reflect the aggregate state of that. So in other words, to give you an example, let's say a pod goes down. Kubernetes and the deployer will basically, the scheduler will reassign the pod to another node, and it will auto heal, right? If that happens, that you probably are not, you might be interested that happened, right? And why? But what matters to the management side of things, so to the topology level, is the fact that what is the health of that deployment? Is it okay or not okay? But you don't necessarily need to understand the nitty-gritty details of what it means. So I'm of the opinion that the reflection of that information should remain within the hierarchy bounds at how it is being decomposed, right? And you should basically get information about events that affect that, but you don't need to understand all the nitty-gritty details necessarily. You can figure that out at the you can get that from the lower level. And so if you follow that principle, I think you follow the way that Kubernetes has been designed, that you delegate certain authorities to certain, let's say, clusters, and they take care of it, right? And we keep it very simple, and that's how allows us to do hierarchical and aggregated and scale out models and what have you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'll stop here.
Subhash, I believe you were first.
Yeah. So Wim, if I understand you correctly, so we would like to only have the knowledge of NF instance within the NF topology in the management cluster, but
Yes.
the nitty-gritty that are related to pod that you want to maintain in the workload cluster. But let's say assume that in the management cluster, if I'm just thinking aloud, let's if we would like to identify which pod, or we would like to do a root cause analysis to understand which network or which pod is down, because of that my UPF is getting impacted, my NF is getting impacted. If we want to do that correlation, so somewhere we need those informations also, right? So
yeah, but it happens at the workload cluster. It will happen at the workload cluster. There's no point in you can do the information, but the workload cluster will take care of it.
Okay, so some context we need to prepare at the management cluster that you are suggesting, and we need to take action based on the service assurance in the workload cluster as well. Like there should be some coordinated
so I
approach.
think if you look to your drawing, we always said that there is multiple levels of closed loop, right? So one is at the workload cluster, one is at the higher level. It's the same with, if you look to ORAN, we have the near real-time RIG, we have the real-time or the near real-time RIG, and then the non-real-time RIG. It's the same, right? So we should follow the same philosophy. So in other words, if there is a problem with the pod, okay, if for example, you ask for a certain capacity and you cannot meet it, there will be a reflection in the NF deployment status to say, hey, I cannot reach this, and that the management cluster will see, and then it can take action to say, okay, I probably need to schedule this somewhere else or something like that. But if the workload cluster itself or the controller that sits on the workload cluster can heal it, why bother the rest of the system?
I see. Okay. So yeah, just going back to the previous question. So in current release, what should be our high level intent? Because what I feel like when any DevOps or anyone goes to deploy any NF, so some intent he will communicate, right? Currently, which is not the NF topology, right? So based on that intent, I think service assurance system should understand those intent, and based on that, it should create its a topology, right? So what is the current high level intent? Do you think we should target for the R2 or maybe some immediate goals?
Okay, but maybe let's first debate this part. I think because there is Bernard and Tal has their hands up. Maybe we should first discuss probably my statements. I don't know whether they have a comment on that or not. But before we go to the next level,
sure.
So, Tal, if I may,
sure.
Yeah. Wim, you're right that we should not try to sort of micromanage from a management cluster the things which are happening in the workload cluster. But there are certain cases where the workload cluster might fail, and this then needs to be sort of made visible to the management cluster. For instance, you mentioned that, for instance, capacity might not be enough. There could also be the thing that sort of the images are not there, and there's sort of crash loops happening over the sort of a longer time, and we need to understand sort of what has gone wrong and where we might have to sort of apply additional measures in order to remedy that. So I do believe that there needs to be at least the possibility of backlinking sort of those aspects to the higher level intent, be it a network function instance definition or whatever. And this is the missing link, which I did not quite understand how that happens.
No, I agree with that, right? So, so in other words, I do agree with that, Bernard. So don't get me wrong. But what I try to argue against is he doesn't need to know the nitty-gritty details on how many pods and how many services or what all the nitty-gritty details it disseminated resources upon. What he needs to do is, of course, if, for example, something does not work, he will reflect. So one way that we have today is through the status. You can basically reflect, okay, I am unhealthy, right? And here is why. And that I do agree with, that he has to report, but not at nitty-gritty level necessarily, right? So you can basically say, I reflected my status of my CR. That's one way of doing it, by the way. You can also go through an observability system potentially, but let's focus on this first. So today what we can do is, if it's unhealthy, he will say, I am not aligned with the intent, and here is why. That I do agree with, but not to the level of detail that
again,
that
sort of to be even more specific, Wim, you have to sort of not only say in general I'm unhealthy, but sort of I would like to have sort of some kind of backlink which says I'm healthy, and this sort of let's say network function instance or whatever type of entity needs to be informed about that. That means this link back I would like to somehow be able to have as available as information so that I can do the correlation.
Yeah, and that's part of the NF topology. I think what Steven is trying to do in R2, as far as I understand, is there will be some reflection of the status of the NF deployment in the workload cluster, and he will report that in the management cluster. And in the upper level NF topology, you will see from the 5 deployments that you have, 4 are okay and 1 is not okay, and here's why.
Not only during the deployment phase, but also during the runtime phase, we need this information.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. In general, yeah. So in general, it will report that. I haven't looked at the code yet, but that's my understanding what he is trying to do. But he will not report, for example, this service went down or this pod is not there or something. He will have an aggregate information about what happened. Okay, but yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. So, sorry, Tal, I'll be very quick here.
Sure.
What I would like to basically see is that there is some kind of skeleton information which allows me to determine sort of how this linkage can be sort of collected. That means that I can know sort of what are the backlinks if something goes wrong. Yeah, it might be that nothing happens and everything is fine. That's fine. But if there's something happening, I would like to have this topology information back. And therefore, I want to have this in a machine readable format so that we can evaluate that for later purposes. Tal, please, sorry for interrupt. Please go on.
No, it's okay. This is all a good discussion. So Wim's point is absolutely correct, but right, and here's what makes the service assurance case so interesting, I think, and so important for us to address. So the description here on the slide assumes a service assurance solution that is external to Nefio somehow, that's running outside of it and determining from the outside what's happening inside. But as Wim points out, a lot of stuff is handled in-house, right? So he talks about the cluster, right, and say a pod flipping, restarting. What is the impact of that? Well, it could have very significant impact, right? If that pod was maintaining state for a network connection, right, that goes down. Now, the thing is that getting some noise. Can somebody please mute themselves?
Yeah, Subhash, I think.
Yeah. Subhash, yeah, thank you. Sorry. The way we actually could handle it, and this is the reason that control loop is closed at the bottom, as Wim points out, it's handled in the cluster, but it's handled in the cluster not just by Kubernetes' built-in kubelet controllers, but by our custom controller, our operator, right? This is kind of the heart of it. There's something sitting there that created that pod and manages that pod for day 2 operations too. It knows if the pod goes down. It's the first one to know what's going on with it, and it is the one that can heal it in the proper way, which could mean doing other things, to maintain that connection. I don't know, creating a load balancer, working around it. So so the impact analysis we're talking about here is correct, right? But I think we have to read this slide as the service assurance solution could actually be living, part of it could be living inside that operator that's running in the workload cluster. And this goes into our Nephi SDK eventually, right? That will be able to help people create that. So my point is that that Kubernetes operator running far away in the workload cluster that is managing the resources might also need to know this high-level desired state intent. That is, the way I've always seen these solutions is that you have high-level intent, but it bubbles out into the entire system. So every component knows, to an extent, what system it's part of, right? It knows what its role is in the entire system, and it has the agency to fix it itself. So I think Kubernetes, just by its nature, suggests a distributed service assurance solution, right? Not something that's external to everything, right? But some of it is internal. So Wim is correct. Yes, it's handled in the cluster, but the cluster needs information from us, policies or whatever other desired state is, so that they would know what to do with it. And how we communicate that, I think, is going to be an interesting challenge for us. Go ahead, Bernard. Oh, maybe your hand was up from before?
Yeah. You're on
Okay.
mute. You need to. No.
Sorry.
maybe.
I wanted to comment on that. Yeah. So, Wim, Tal, I fully agree with what you've been saying here. And sort of, sorry if this statement here regarding the service assurance was sort of implying somehow that it would be one external solution. I'm not thinking in that direction. I was rather wanting to have it as a rather generic sort of description of sort of how service assurance could potentially look like, and can it be distributed setup, as you mentioned, and I think that's the correct approach, actually. Nevertheless, sort of those situations where sort of, let's say, the low-level operators or controllers in the workload cluster can manage sort of the state consistently, they don't bubble up. Yeah, that means basically if everything is fine and you simply do a scale in, scale out, or whatever type of mechanism to account for the service assurance related aspects here, sort of it basically is happening without impacting the intent. But as soon as that doesn't work any longer, yeah, that means as soon as the controllers or operators in the workload cluster are not able to fulfill sort of the task which they've been given, then there needs to be some kind of communication sort of which is bubbling up, and then sort of making it visible to the higher level type of controller, so that they know sort of underneath there's something which it wasn't okay and might have to be sort of remedied at a higher level based on the controllers and operator capabilities there. And
yes, exactly.
Yeah,
that's.
and so
I agree with that. I think we both agree with. We all agree with that. I think in the meantime, but in an aggregated, in an hierarchical fashion, I think is what we are saying somehow, right? So if really the intent or the controller that we have, right, or maybe it will be another piece of a controller, it doesn't really matter. Let's assume it's a controller. He will, if he cannot remediate, right, or he cannot do it anymore, he will have to report to say, hey, I'm out of options. I will tell you, please help.
Yes. And that's, yeah, sorry, please. Natal, please go on, please.
I wanted to say all this introduces an interesting aspect that I might even call meta service assurance, right? As Bernard pointed out, what happens, so if we have a distributed service assurance solution, right? What happens if one of the agents, right, the subsystems, for example, an operator, or it could be a topology controller or something like that, or a management cluster somewhere, right? What happens if that itself can't be doing its job anymore? It went down for some reason, right? So service assurance is not just about maintaining the network functions and network services, but also maintaining the subsystems that delegate some of that service assurance work, right? So those themselves need to be monitored, right? So for example, a cluster is not itself the service, right? But it is the requirement for the service, and a general service assurance solution needs to know about that too. right? Is the cluster down?
Correct.
Yeah, this is very detailed. So, Bernard, this slide I don't think is wrong, but I think it raises questions, right? I think we need more detail. For example, as Subhash pointed out, what is a high-level intent? What is meant here? And I think also what is a service assurance solution? Because I think we are thinking about it in a non-traditional way.
Mm-hmm. So I can try to refine that a little bit. Yeah. My question was more related to, just imagine that we start with this user story. Sort of how much detail do we need in order to sort of derive out of that epoch? Yeah, that means I would sort of invite all of us to sort of try to refine that in such a way that we can say, okay, this is good enough to start with epoch for that type of user story.
I believe,
I
sorry to chime in, but I believe that Stephen is delivering upon this already in R2. Maybe not in all the nitty-gritty details that you want, but he is going to report. So what I said is, if you say I have a topology with, let's say, 5 network functions, and if one is not healthy or doesn't really function properly, and he cannot heal it himself, he will report that.
Mm-hmm.
Right. We do have that, but that's half of it, right? That's just determining the issue, right? It's not actually solving the issue.
No, but this is impact analysis, right? Which here is, so we are basically, first of all, need to know there is a problem, right? So that's what we are discussing here. I think we are delivering upon that, I think, or at least if we succeed, so that will be in R2 somehow. Stephen is doing that, I think. Sorry. Yeah.
I think Wim, that one only checks the deployed and undeployed, if I remember correctly.
Yes, because that's all we have right now. So yeah, so that's why it does the things that it needs right now. So so the second thing that is happening, okay, we are working on observability that will not be delivered in R2. With that, we will have more information on the workload cluster to figure out more details. But at the moment, what we have is, for example, it will be very basic, right? As I said, it either works or doesn't work, right? And I think what we are then working on next is, with observability, we are trying to get some information and statistics and try to, we need that in order to get more information. I also pinged the free 5GC guys to see which type of metrics or information we can get out of the system to get more detailed information. But all of this will happen at the workload cluster, right? So because that's where this detailed information will be assembled and consumed.
But Stephen's topology controller, we shouldn't just call it Stephen's, but the topology controller runs in the management cluster. So this is our control loop number 2, right? It's not control loop number 3.
No, but 3 is workload, Tal?
Yeah, 3 is the lowest level. Yeah, according to the diagram that Subhash created. So I think we do have opportunity to do something, a number 3 loop, which to me is more interesting because it's something we really haven't done at all in FEO yet. And to an extent, it's very straightforward. It's exactly the example you were talking about, Wim, of a pod going down, right? If we can show an example using either Free5GC or OpenAI of a pod going down and self-healing, but not just self-healing, magically self-healing, but self-healing according to policy, right? I feel like a proper POC for service assurance has to involve policy framework and observability and our operators, right? It's the mix of those 3 that actually enable service assurance, right? So I think to an extent, impact analysis, it's step 1, right? But all this means really is observability to me, right? Impact analysis is observability. If we have observability, then we can analyze it, right? The data that we collect. But I think for a proper POC for service assurance should involve those 3 ingredients, right? Observability, policy, and actually application of that policy, right? Somewhere in the control loop. It could be workload cluster, it could be management cluster.
Yeah. My point is, Tal, is that we are working first on we need to have the observability before you can take action, right? And
Exactly.
that will take a bit of time. That's why for me it goes in to a certain extent in sequence, because you need the data to be able to do something.
So I think so this is why I'm kind of looking towards a workload cluster solution, because we don't need observability a framework, because it's already in the workload cluster. We don't have to move data anywhere. So the operator is directly seeing its pods, for example, so it can do something. The lowest level control loop is the easiest, right? Because it stays in one place.
But I'm also talking about observability in the workload cluster, by the way.
Yeah, we are trying to do that, but I think as you pointed out, we already have data, right? The operator, of course, knows the pods that it created and the services that it created, and yeah, I don't think
because for the pod going down, we already do today, by the way. So the pod going down with the deployment, it will respin it. We can do that
Kubernetes
today, right?
does that automatically, right? That's its deployment. Right, actually, its replica set controller handles that. But my point is that there might be something else we should be doing at the operator, right? Other than just restarting the pod, right? Restarting the pod could have cascading effects on the rest of the network function, right? Depending on what the pod is, right? And what it's doing. So there might be some more work that needs to be done. So that's a scenario I'm looking for, right? A self-healing scenario that's non-trivial, that's not just the pod restarts and everything's okay, but a pod was restarted and everything is broken, right? And now, because the pod was restarted, you have to do something else in order to fix it, and fix it according to some high-level desired state, right? So information coming from something higher up. So that's kind of the user story I'm hoping we can get to, right? That does something interesting beyond what we have right now, that pushes us to do something more.
Yeah, something like some stateful application, right? Where we need to do something before restarting it.
Right. Well, all applications, I think any serious application has stateful and non-stateful parts, of course, right? There's always data stored somewhere. But the microservices architecture, assuming the network function follows it, will break it down to as many pieces as it can. And some of them might be stateful and some not. So the stateless components, no problem. They restart, they continue doing everything as usual. But the stateful one, which includes components that maintain sessions, network sessions, right? Something might go wrong. You know, maybe the pod is restarted, but you've lost some data. That's an impact, right? Can you deal with that impact? It could just mean sending an alert somewhere, right, to another part of the system, right? Hey, this call was down for 10 seconds. This means the user should not be charged for those 10 seconds, right? Impact doesn't necessarily, have to mean that it doesn't have to be a self-healing scenario. It could be dealing with the impact that happened in some way, right? Alerting, etc. As we know, service assurance covers a lot of things. Bernard, your hand is up. Please go ahead.
Yeah. So following up on your proposal here, I would really want to start with a very, very simplistic approach, but I would also want to address the criticism which has been mentioned regarding Workgroup 1, that we're not coming up with user stories which are actually implementable, etc. So I really would like to come up with sort of an alignment here, either between sort of what Stephen is already doing and making sure that sort of if we are writing this user story, Stephen says, yes, I can fulfill that, or that we sort of come up with a slight variation. For instance, just as you mentioned, notification is already something which is valuable from an operations point of view. If we are noticing that sort of a certain procedure is taking a longer time, then a simple notification of, look here, we're sort of having issues with sort of a low-level procedure and it potentially might infect this intent, is already a valuable bit of information. So I would be very happy to come up with some kind of user story which would sort of address that exactly, and where I would also get the feedback from the automation team that this is a user story which can be actually implemented. And that's why I'm wanting to understand sort of what is missing. What do I have to do in order to get there?
See, okay, maybe I'll quickly reply, right? The reason why we end, I'm going to observability is the following, is that I think the scenarios tell that you are outlining, we have constraints with 35GC and OAI of what they can do, right? So what we are aiming for in observability is we have a way to generate statistics. We can even generate something really bad, right? So if we have that, we have the means to do so. And that could basically trigger an event that does something. The alternative to that is you fake it somehow. So we build like a mock where you fake something really bad and you do something about it. That's the alternative to it. But these are the options that you have, right? So I was more of the opinion, if we have the observability inside of the workload cluster and we have an ability to create events, we actually simulate a whole chain. You see, so that's where I was going. But okay, I'll stop here. Yeah, Subhash, I think you're next.
Yeah, I was just thinking around NF topology controller. So currently, I see that NF topology controller does not take any action. So it just receives, it consumes the event like whether NF instance is deployed or not deployed. And possibly just to complete this service assurance part, we can take some action based on NF instances not deployed. We can possibly push some policy or maybe some action to the workload cluster, and that may create some kind of pod again, recreate the pod or do certain activities. So that we can do, I think, in my opinion, to complete the to propose some user story.
And what action would you consider to do?
For example, when we try to create some package variant, so that will finally result in some kind of configuration, possibly it will create some network interface, and maybe because of that network interface, it is not deployable, and somehow it should be reported back to NF topology that this link is missing, and then we need to think that need to check why in this package variant this network interface not got created, and based on that, we'll take some action maybe to create correct configuration or to identify the missing configuration. Just I'm thinking at a very high level. Does it sound okay? Wim, any comments?
Yeah. So the thing is, in this case, you probably have to create 2 packages or something like that.
Right.
Okay, we have to think on how to do it. It's not straightforward, but it's possible potentially. I mean, you have to create 2 packages. You fake something basically, right? So
right.
You're faking stuff.
Yeah. So that happens. I think some misconfigured network interface will create, or that should be reported back to the management cluster.
So that's where that's why, one of the things that we are trying to do in the management cluster is to avoid that, right? So you have the ability to test it before you deploy. So from that point of view, it's a very fakey scenario, because basically your intent that you gave was wrong.
Right.
So it means that actually there's a bug in the controller somehow.
Correct. So maybe some manual intervention so that he can again approve package modification, and after that you create new resources. So that opportunity also we have it. Correct.
Yeah, you have to somehow, what you can do, for example, you can create 2 packages, but you're faking stuff, right? Because you create package number 1, you get an error, you create package 2 or something like that. That you can do.
Yes.
But you're all right, that's what I'm trying to say. You're faking somehow the system.
Of course. In R2, as an immediate use case, we can take this, And once the observability is complete, we will try to consume it, and in this way we will expand the assurance part. So that was my thought at very high level.
Yeah, let other people probably chime in. Bala.
Yeah, so I'm sorry, I may have missed a little bit of context because I had to be away for a few minutes in the beginning. So it's a general observation I wanted to pose as a question here. So obviously, all the CaaS/PaaS vendors, whether they are the cloud providers or packaged Kubernetes distributors such as Red Hat or VMware or WinRiver for that matter. I mean, everyone will have some kind of solution for both service assurance and telemetry. Obviously, they will provide, from the platform perspective, they'll provide the metrics and the alerts related to observability and service assurance. And also the network function vendors, obviously, they will also provide their own set of metrics/alerts, maybe compliant to the own interface or in some way and form. I mean, it's not really important in terms of what is the protocol to obtain that is. So my question here is, how do we play well in a complementary fashion in that environment? So I think that should determine what exactly we need to instrument. For example, we don't need to instrument the base platform. I'm pretty sure there are a lot of places, a lot of open source projects that are already there and already packaged in terms of instrumenting the base platform. I don't know how instrumented Porch is. Maybe if not, probably we can provide the requirements of the Porch team to instrument the way we want. So that was a overarching question. Subhash, Wim, Tal, Bernard, Varda. Like, how do we play in a very complementary fashion in the ecosystem where we already have a lot of things instrumented for the purposes of service assurance, based on which, how do we determine the gap and where do we instrument?
I mean, I think maybe I just started to segment, but maybe what we should do is propose some use case or user scenarios and see, and maybe suggest a few of them, and we can discuss the implications on how to accomplish them potentially at some point, right? Yeah, but does it make sense, Bala?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and the main point we is, like we need to exactly figure out what we need to instrument in terms of providing the service assurance, the use cases that we are talking about, and then where we can use the existing data. So probably I think that may be, I think we may get into the details when we start in the design and implementation phase. That's what I'm thinking. Yeah. Thank you.
I have some answers, but we have a few hands up. Varada?
No problem. You can answer, and then I'll take on Tal.
No, please. People are tired of my voice.
I'm going to introduce another topic, so I thought let's finish that topic.
Okay. Well, thank you. So, Bala, I think it's a really important question you're asking. I think we have a general problem, I would say, in FEO, where we don't always know how we fit into existing orchestration narratives. And that's in a way deliberate because we're trying to disrupt things a little bit, and we're starting from basic building blocks. We work in a clean room environment, right? We're not thinking about what the world is doing. Etsy, ORAN, and 3GPP, etc. We're trying to build something to deliver very exactly on the mission that we gave ourselves, right? To deliver network functions. But now we still want to fit in these narratives. That's the whole north, south, east, west integration themes, right? We know that there's systems around us and we want to interact with them. I think we're going about this the right way, right? I don't think we should start with these external systems and then try to implement them. For example, some people have suggested we take ORAN and implement it. right? Or the same thing here. I don't think for service assurance, we should take an existing service assurance solution and then try to see how we implement its interfaces, right? If we create the basic building blocks, then I think the service assurance systems would be able to interact with this. And I know some of those systems, and they're designed, of course, to be very flexible, right? The whole idea is it's a system that you collect data and you do things, but you have to onboard all your systems into it, right? The service assurance should be as generic as possible in order to do its work, but it has to have the ability to work with rich subsystems, right? So Nefio would have to be integrated into such a system, just like any other system. But I think the best we can do is just make our integration points very powerful and very useful and very delegatable. So we would actually maybe reduce some of the responsibility that current service assurance system does, right? Just by nature, our cloud native nature, the fact that some of our systems are very agentful. Anyway, that's my point.
Cool. Thanks, Tom. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Varda, you are next.
Yes. Actually, I remember vaguely, in before starting the observability, group, Sandeep was demonstrating something like the intent is transactions, how many transactions per second, how many subscribers per second, and from there he's deducing what are the EMF, SMF, UPF instances and their CPU memory network requirements. Do you remember, Subhash, something like that, or anybody here? Or probably is it the high level intent? I'm just trying to answer Bernard's question. He has asked, can you guys give us some high level intent? But it remembers me. I'm not sure whether it's doable. And he claimed some talk was done. Any guys remember, Subhash?
No, Varda. I need to check that slide actually, Varda.
Right.
What I know, Varada, is that Varada is your name, right?
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So I know that Free5GC has the ability to report. So there is a dashboard. So I recently interacted with the Free5GC guys. So there is a dashboard that report that in Free5GC, right? So you can get that information. So the way we have modeled it right now, but it goes again to the NF deployment. So in NF deployment, that capacity is actually defined as how many sessions per second. So capacity has a number of metrics or number of KPIs, if you will, that we defined, like how many subscribers, how many sessions per second, what is the throughput, and so on and so forth. But this is delegated also to the workload cluster because that capacity at the moment in our controller is used to then determine the type of pods. And at the moment we don't do a horizontal scale, but if we do horizontal scale, also the scale out session of it. So these, from my perspective, these parameters have an effect on the workload cluster again.
Okay. Do you mean to say that?
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you mean to say that there is going to be an appreciable work if we take such an intent, like transaction per second or subscriber per second for core Free5GC core?
So this is part of the discussion in observability, right? We are trying to see what metrics can we get from the various components that we have, right, out of the box, and which one do we have to emulate, right? So we potentially do emulation of metrics. And if we have that information available, we can use it for sure.
Right. There is also some closed loop, automation stuff discussed in observability, right? That is principally a kind of a service assurance, right? It's more of a
see, that's for me. So that's also the thing is at the moment observability is not. So what we made as a comment is that in the observability we are not going to focus on actions. We are just going to focus on collecting the data and making it available and stop there. Basically, that was the discussion we had last meeting. And I think that's a good thing, probably, right? Because then the action taking is coming from here.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Perfect. Thanks, Wim. What I see now, Bernard, maybe I will try to get the slides from Sandeep. He was demonstrating some CLA, closed loop automation. At the time, no observability, no service assurance group and all. He was just proposing, there can be an intent like transactions per second or subscribers per second. And he decides, okay, if the transactions per second is not 200 per 200, then correspondingly he'll take a call. Okay, we need to spawn more AMFs, or more CPUs, for a particular AMFs, like that. He had some rules actually. Maybe I'll get back to you, on this, what was the thing, and if demo is possible, we can make it.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah. And one more thing, yes, I know, you guys are targeting what is achievable in R3 time frame. That's very good discussion, definitely. At the same time, when we want to design an architecture, we need to consider all scenarios. So in that perspective, since Tim, more people are there from our end, I'm just thinking, if we restrict ourselves to the topology, controller as a starting point, maybe that is not a high level intent, right? Maybe a subnet slice, capability might be an high level intent. Not just I'm thinking, because the current way things work, right? What 3GPP defines is, okay, I want a throughput of X, latency of Y, and all, in the subnet slice, and many other parameters. And then if it is not there, then they are going to spawn a set of AMF plus SMF plus UPF. So is the beginning of specifying intent from NF topology controller, is the starting point, or there is going to be something higher level? And it's a general discussion for architecture, not targeting the immediate, R2 time frame or R3 time frame. Anybody can jump
in. Actually, yeah, Varda, I was thinking this discussion would be valid for the modeling group, I think, is where we could understand how they are building the model for high-level intents and what they are capturing, and also I feel the modeling team could give some input, means how we are going to manage the topology. So this discussion, I think we should do with the modeling team also.
even even service level, service assurance, you are having high level intent. So you are going to start with the high level intent of enough instances.
Currently, I see that we have the NF topology, so which can correlate different NF instance. And I'm not sure what high level intent we should consider for the service assurance. So maybe slowly we'll be able to understand means how the assurance would be defined by those high level intent, and how we group the resource under it to understand the whole relationship. So I think that use case should define slowly. So that might that's my thinking. Others can comment.
Sure. Yeah. The question is, whether we have some components in mind, enough topology controller, observability framework, policy, all those things.
Yeah.
It all begins with an enough instance as a intent, right? Enough instance, 1, 2, 3, 4, and but I believe there must be something more than that, and finally enough instance is a part of it. Yeah, but that's okay. Let's think later. Actually, just I want to ensure that if that's the case, then even the architecture will contain more components. That's the hint I'm getting. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, Varda. Bernard, I was seeing you had raised your hand. Would you like to take some closing remark before we close the meeting? Because only 1 minute we left.
No, that's fine. I'm fine. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you, everyone. We are just at our end of the meeting. So yeah, we have we'll try to add some more information on this user story. So yeah, next meeting we'll try to go a much little deeper to this use case and try to understand what we could make. Yeah. Thank you for joining this meeting and sharing your information. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thanks,
Thanks.
In the meeting.
everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you.